Welcome to Sleepy Tales. My name is Mateus, and before we begin today's story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below saying, "I'll sleep well tonight." Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's tale. The world had changed. What was once a bustling city filled with life and energy had become a desolate, eerie wasteland. The streets were littered with abandoned cars and debris, and the buildings had crumbled and fallen apart. The only sounds that could be heard were the occasional groans of the undead, signaling the presence of the zombies that now roamed the streets. A group of survivors had banded together in an effort to stay alive in this new world. The group consisted of a former military man, a doctor, an engineering student, a father and his teenage daughter, and a police officer. They had been traveling together for months, scavenging for food, water, and supplies, and fighting off the relentless waves of zombies that seemed to grow in number each day. They had managed to stay alive by working together and relying on each other's strengths. The military man, named John, was the group's leader, using his training to strategize their movements and defend them against the zombies. The doctor, Sarah, was in charge of tending to any injuries and illnesses that arose within the group. The engineering student, Dave, used his technical skills to repair any broken equipment or gadgets. The father, Tom, and his daughter, Lily, provided a sense of hope and a reminder of what they were fighting for. And the police officer, Mark, helped keep them all safe with his training and expertise. As they traveled through the abandoned city, they searched for any signs of life or hope. They had heard rumors of a safe haven somewhere in the city, a place where survivors had banded together to create a community that was protected from the zombies. It was a long shot, but they had to try. They followed the rumors and made their way to an old hospital on the outskirts of the city. The building was massive, with several floors and multiple wings. The front doors were barricaded, and the windows were boarded up, but there were signs of life inside. The survivors cautiously approached the hospital and banged on the door, calling out for anyone inside. After a few minutes of silence, the doors creaked open, and a woman appeared. She was dressed in ragged clothes and had a wild look in her eyes. She peered out at the group and then motioned for them to come inside. The group hesitated, but they were desperate for shelter and safety. They cautiously entered the hospital and were greeted by a group of survivors who had made their home within the walls of the building. At first, everything seemed perfect. The group was welcomed with open arms and shown to a safe place to sleep. They were fed and given water, and for the first time in months, they felt like they could relax. But as the days went on, things started to feel off. The other survivors were always watching them, eyeing them suspiciously. They had strict rules that had to be followed, and any deviation from those rules was met with punishment. One day, while exploring the hospital, Lily stumbled upon a room that was locked. She could hear strange noises coming from inside, and curiosity got the better of her. She managed to pick the lock and opened the door, only to find a horrific scene. Inside the room were several survivors who had been tied up and left to die. They were emaciated and covered in wounds, evidence of being tortured and abused. Lily screamed and ran out of the room, alerting the others. The group was horrified by what they had seen, but they didn't know what to do. They were trapped within the walls of the hospital, and they didn't know who they could trust. They had to come up with a plan to escape and get out of the hospital. As they gathered together to discuss their options, they realized that they were not the only ones who had stumbled upon this safe haven. There were other survivors who had been tricked into coming to the hospital, and they too had been imprisoned and tortured. The group realized that the woman who had let them into the hospital was not a survivor, but was, in fact, a sadistic leader who enjoyed torturing and killing those who came into her grasp. She had lured them in with false promises of safety and security, only to use them for a twisted pleasure. The group had to act fast. They knew that they couldn't take on the entire group of survivors, but they also knew that they couldn't just leave the others behind to suffer. They had to come up with a plan. Using their combined skills, they created a diversion and managed to sneak out of the hospital, taking as many of the imprisoned survivors with them as they could. They fought their way through the zombie-infested streets and eventually found a safe place to rest and regroup. It wasn't until they had made it to safety that they realized that they had been followed. The woman who had led them to the hospital was standing outside, watching them from a distance. She had a twisted smile on her face and a glint in her eye that made the group shudder with fear. It was then that they realized the true horror of their situation. They had escaped the clutches of the sadistic woman, but they had unknowingly led her right to their new safe haven. They had no idea what horrors awaited them now that she had found them. The group was left with a feeling of dread as they huddled together, preparing for the next wave of horror that was sure to come. They had escaped one nightmare, only to find themselves in another. And so the survivors hunkered down, ready to face whatever came their way. They knew that they had to stay strong and work together if they were going to make it through this new horror. They had no idea what the future held, but they were determined to face it head-on and survive, no matter what. Thank you for listening to this bedtime story, and remember, if you struggle with falling or staying asleep at night, click on the first link in the description for the ultimate solution to your problem. Now, choose one of these two videos and continue on our journey in the world of bedtime stories.